Welcome to folks who are starting to trickle in to our webinar today. We're so glad you're here. We will gonna give folks a couple of minutes just to get settled in. I think we have over 140 registrants today, and so we want to make sure that we can get a critical mass of folks settled in. Zoom is always despite how long we've been using it now, it's always presents individual challenges for folks. So we're going to give folks a minute or two to get settled in, get their audio where it needs to be, and then we will get started. And again, we're really glad to have you all with us today. Welcome to folks who are just joining. We have folks still entering the Zoom space, and so we're giving everybody a minute to get in, get their technology all settled, their audio figured out, and then we will get started. We're really happy to have you with us today. Get started in just a moment. I will say, I saw somebody has already raised their hand. Please feel free to use the chat to communicate with us if you've got technology issues or you want to engage in discussion. I'll repeat this when we get started. We're going to have folks use the Q&A feature in Zoom to leave questions, and folks are welcome to upvote those questions. And then if you've got discussion items, things you need to say, or logistical questions, please feel free to use the chat for that. But we won't be using audio for participants today. We'll just be using the Q&A and chat features. So please feel free to use those. Again, welcome to everybody that's just joining our webinar. We're giving folks just a couple of extra minutes to get settled in, get their technology organized. Starting a Zoom is always an interesting experience. It's a little bit like microwaving popcorn. You know, it's probably more of an art than a science, because just when you think it's time to pull the popcorn out of the microwave, 18 more kernels pop, and you're like, dang, now I gotta wait a second. So I think we will go ahead and get started. We've got a little bit of introduction and some housekeeping on the front end, so that'll give folks who are just getting in a minute to get settled as we do that. So welcome, everybody. My name is Aaron Bockenheimer. I serve as the Executive Director for Student Development and Campus Partnerships here at UNC Chapel Hill. In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stephen Wiley, who will also introduce himself as we get into the presentation part of the program today. But we're really happy to have you. This is a conversation that we have had several times over the years, and whether it's over a webinar platform or on a Facebook Live event or at family weekend in person or during orientation, we have found that opportunities to connect with students and families around the sort of how you navigate on and off campus living after your first year at Carolina is a really helpful conversation. And so what we are going to do today is Stephen and I are going to take a few minutes at the front end to share some slides and some information. You know, I really think of this as sort of context setting. It's some information about on and off campus housing and sort of how some of those processes work. Throughout the presentation, and once we are done presenting slides, folks can use the Q&A feature to ask questions. And if you see a question that you really like, please feel free to upvote it within Zoom. If you want to just engage in conversation, you have a thought or perspective, please feel free to use the chat feature for that. Or if you have logistical questions, right? Your Zoom is not working, you can't hear one of us, you can't see the slide, please drop that information in the chat as well. So again, our plan is to spend a few minutes sharing some information, some context, some background, and then we will open up the floor to Q&A. And there are, I've been doing this a long time, there are no bad questions. This is a complicated, at times, process. There's a lot that goes into decision making, and Stephen and I want to be able to answer as many questions as we possibly can and give you the best information that we can give you so that students and families can make informed decisions as they progress through their career at Carolina. So please be thinking about questions, and please feel free to drop those in the Q&A throughout the presentation today. Again, we're really glad you're here, and we appreciate New Student and Family Programs for putting this program on. Again, I've seen a couple of folks raise their hand. We're not going to unmute folks throughout the presentation today, so please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature to either ask questions or engage in discussion. All right, with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Stephen Wiley from Carolina Housing. Stephen will get us started. Stephen, I'll advance slides for you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Wiley. I am the Director for Administrative Services here in Carolina Housing. I oversee the housing assignments process, so I can help answer questions around what that looks like. So really excited to talk to you today. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Also, at the end, I'll make sure my contact information is in the chat as well. It is on the slide as well. So if you have more personal questions you want to ask or specifics, you could do so. A little bit about Carolina Housing by the numbers here. So we are a fairly large operation on campus. We actually operate in 46 different buildings on our campus. We have 32 residence halls. We also have 5 apartment style buildings for undergraduate housing and 9 buildings for graduate and family housing. We are a receipt supported department. And what we mean by that is every dollar that we use in our operating budget is generated by student rent. So we are very mindful of what the housing costs are and the impact that that can have, while also trying to maintain some pretty historic buildings on this campus. We actually just celebrated 230 years actually with the residence hall. So it's a pretty exciting time. With our capacity, as you can see there, combining and coupling that with Granville Towers, we actually can house over 9,200 students on campus. I do want to put a little asterisk on that for the upcoming academic year. Avery Hall will be offline, so we will lose 230 beds as we do a renovation project there. But we are a fairly large operation on our campus. Interestingly enough, we're also the largest student employer on campus. So if you'll proceed, Aaron. So our philosophy, we commonly talk about on-campus housing as a 2-on, 2-off. We typically see a majority of, well, all of our first-year students do live on campus, but our second-year students, a high number of them live on campus as well. And what we really hang our hat on is students that live on campus graduate at higher rates, have higher GPAs across their off-campus peers, are more likely to attend the events on campus due to the convenience of that, and are also more likely to participate in some of the clubs and organizations. I know one of the things I've always heard from students that are very involved on campus is that access to living on campus and what that looks like from a convenience standpoint. You know, a lot of times student organizations may meet late at night. The ability to kind of go to that meeting and then hop on over to your residence hall later in the evening is a great convenience to many, especially when you consider parking is so limited on this campus. But we really do want to provide and strive to make those things possible for our students. We talked about the first year live on requirement as a reason why students live on campus. That one's pretty self-explanatory, but outside of that, the safety, the sense of community, the camaraderie that students have with their fellow peers on their floor, the convenience piece of the classroom and everything else here on campus. And what we're really seeing is the affordability is a way that's separating on-campus housing versus off-campus. As with a lot of the market today, off-campus housing has matched the market in many ways. So we're seeing more and more students' demand has gone up for on-campus housing as they're looking for more affordable options, but also some of the flexibility that on-campus housing provides. In particular, our students that are going to study abroad or maybe graduating in December and things like that. Here we just want to kind of show a little bit around the different options we talked about previously, but we've got our traditional corridor style. When we're talking about those, that's what you think about where they go down the hall and they share a large communal bathroom with their peers. We have our semi-suite shared restroom style space. That is what we kind of call a Jack and Jill. If you're familiar with that, maybe Corey, Horton, Craig North, or Hardin. We do offer apartment style housing units. Most of those are 4-bedroom, 2-bath in Ram Village, but we do have a limited number of 3 and 2-bedroom options. We also have some shared options down there, which are a little unique. Our short corridor, which is our most common space on campus. This is kind of what you think about in high rises like Hinton James. Those are typically 4 double rooms that share a bathroom with everyone on the floor. And then we have the unique super suites that are always in high demand in Morrison, which are the top 3 floors of Morrison. They are formerly a short corridor, but one of those rooms has been converted into a living room. So it's a pretty popular option. But this kind of shows you the diversity that we have on campus. And there are pros and cons to each of these arrangements, whether it's the location on campus, whether it's just the sense of community. A corridor style building is going to be a little bit more sociable than maybe a suite, because at the end of the day, they got to come out of their room to go down the hall. But we do offer quite a bit, and we're always looking to make improvements to those offerings.
I'll also note, if folks are doing the math at home, you will note that the significant majority of on-campus properties are what we might refer to as more traditional sort of dorm residence hall looking spaces, right? Those traditional corridor and short corridor. And then we have a limited number of apartment style housing. And of course, as students, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, students progress through their career and they're looking for more privacy or more independence or a kitchen or what have you, right? We have a limited number of those. And so obviously, when Stephen and I and others are talking about sort of the considerations, it's all the other really awesome stuff that's available to them on campus that we want to sort of add into the conversation, and we want students to be thinking about, because while they may be able to access apartment style housing more readily in the off-campus community, there's a lot of advantages on campus that the off-campus community doesn't necessarily offer. And so that's why these conversations and these presentations, I think, are always so helpful for folks to sort of understand the big picture, because it's not always an easy apples to apples comparison.
Yes. And it's a nice segue into a little bit here. So the on-campus kind of experience, we talked around amenities. One of the things that really sets on-campus housing apart, I think, from the off-campus options is what we can offer the student that is unique, whether it's our in-house staff. When you think around the support that you get from the community directors, the RAs, but also our maintenance teams and all of those things that we offer there. We do have package centers on campus. For math folks out there, we actually deal with over 170,000 packages on an annual basis through our package centers. So the students are definitely getting items. Our community offices, we have some unique game lounges. Obviously, all of our utilities are included, and that includes high-speed internet and Wi-Fi access. But I think the unique ones, when you think around what we offer, is the Carolina Gaming Arena, the Carmichael Makerspace, the Morrison Art Studio. We even have an escape room on campus. Those are some really unique features that we have that we program with partners on campus to support those spaces. And actually, Chapel Thrill Escape Room is a student-run space. That's a student group here that started that as a business entity, and they run an escape room here on campus in Cobb Hall. So we do offer some really unique opportunities here on campus, secondary to the convenience and the safety piece and all those things that really kind of make the community so important here on campus. We'll talk a little bit more about rates, but since it's on this page here, I want to just kind of highlight what some of those are. These are our current academic year rates. And as you're comparing, it's important to note that we bill on a semester basis. So think around that separately from what a contract looks like off campus. If you're trying to compare more apples to apples, we say Fall Spring is about a 9-month contract. So as you're looking through your options, please keep that in mind. We are. So I'm going to hand this one over to Aaron. With Aaron's kind of partnership and connection with the off-campus properties, he's a little bit more up to speed with where these rates are and how they're all on board. So Aaron, I'm going to yield it back to you.
Cool. Sorry for jumping ahead a couple of slides on you there. Got a little itchy fingers. So this is a really important slide, and I'll say both the previous slide in terms of looking at the rates, and Stephen mentioned the 9-month contract. When we went out, and we've done this over the years, right? So we did this in 2018. We did it again in 2022. We sort of looked at, okay, where does Ram Village, which is the highest cost on-campus undergraduate property, and it's also the most like to the apartment that students are going to find off campus. So when we take Ram Village and we look at where does Ram Village sort of sit on a cost 1-bedroom average per month, when we did this in 2018, and then we looked at it in comparison to sort of the 20 most popular off-campus student properties, it actually sat about in the middle. When we did it again in 2022, and you'll see here in this slide, it sort of sat 2/3 of the way down the list. When we now look at it in fall 2023, Ram Village is essentially the affordable housing option in the town of Chapel Hill. You will look, if you look at this slide more carefully, many of the properties that are on this have gone even higher in terms of their rates. One of the most affordable off-campus options was demolished and turned into a new property. So we hear a lot from students about affordability and cost. And a comment that we often would get is, well, I'm thinking about moving off campus because it's less expensive. And we really want to pause with students when we hear that now and make sure that they are really thinking through that and getting good information, because they may find a more affordable option off campus, but it's not as simple as off campus is more affordable than on campus. In fact, most of our students are reporting to us now that on campus is the most affordable option for them, particularly as it pertains to sort of looking at a 12-month contract versus a 9-month contract. But even on an average per month, on-campus housing has become the more affordable, or one of the more affordable options. And of course, these off-campus properties are, as Stephen indicated earlier, reflective of the market. And many of our properties are owned by large real estate holding companies and managed by property management companies that have large national footprints that are operating in highly competitive off-campus markets across the country, right? And they're businesses, and they, in many cases, have great products, but they are reflective of a highly competitive market here in Chapel Hill. And so we just wanted to sort of highlight the sort of value proposition piece, as well as just the context of the affordability piece in terms of living off campus for folks. And Stephen, I'll let you pick it up to me.
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, this actually segues nicely. This is Avery Hall. So if you'll notice in all of those windows, you'll see the window unit AC. That is a big reason why that property is coming offline for next year. We're going to add an elevator, do some more ground level suite work as well, but we're going to convert the building over to central heat and air, and that's part of our ongoing process as we continue to modernize our buildings and offerings across campus. Being historical campus that we are, we do have a lot of residence halls that were constructed at a time when students didn't have a lot of devices, and the corridor style was the way to go. But as we think around more private options and more privacy in bathrooms and things like that, we're always looking to see where we can modernize and meet the needs. So we'll continue to look at our unit type demand. One of the unique things we did a couple years ago, just before COVID, is we in Joiner Hall, we took all the suite style bathrooms out and built what we call a spa, if you will, bathroom, where there's a pod of 4 individual use bathrooms, similar to like the bathroom that you have in your own personal home. So there's only one sink, one toilet, one shower to give that higher level of privacy that students are looking for. We're always going to be working to make facility upgrades and evaluating what our needs are on campus, and then continuing with partnerships across campus, whether it's Theme and the Makerspace, and other unique opportunities like our Hardin Advising Hub. We're always looking to see where we can provide more value offer to our students with what we have. And we're going to do that while focusing on rates. We are towards a deadline on this one, so I do want to kind of just give you a quick refresher on some important dates for returning students. So the application opened up on October 17th. The priority deadline is November 26th at midnight. Yes, that is a holiday date, so it's on a Sunday. So we'll come back in the office and answer any questions the next day, and we'll get to rolling. But it's very important if a student wants to secure on-campus housing that they consider applying by that priority deadline. And the reason for that is everyone who applies by that date will go through the initial process. If anyone applies after that date, we will look to make their assignment after the fact. So for returning students, every year we always have 600 or 700 or so that are trying to finalize their plans, and that's totally fine. We're supportive of that, but just know that that may impact your ability to get on-campus housing. One of the things for on-campus housing that we hear a lot about is why is it so early? And I want to make sure that we talk around why that is. The biggest driver there is really students were struggling because the off-campus market is signing leases in some of the more desired spaces very early on. And when our process was in February, they had to make a decision to participate in that process or wait to see what they would get in on-campus housing. So from the student request, we really decided that it was made more sense for us to move our process up, understanding that for some that was going to be a bit of a challenge. So that's why you see it fall, the October-November deadline, and we want to make sure we wrap it up before we get into finals for fall. Couple important notes: we don't charge an application fee. There's no security deposit for on-campus housing. But if a student does submit the housing contract, they're locking themselves into some type of cancellation penalty. That cancellation penalty, if they choose to go off campus, is $300 if they cancel by March 1st. And it does increase as of March 2nd, and then it will increase again as of August 1. Sometimes that we waive that, though, is maybe a student's going to study abroad, we'll cancel that. If they withdraw, we cancel without a penalty. We are flexible there. It's just for those that say, hey, I've made alternative arrangements. And we keep that in place, especially as demand has gone up and we are getting tighter and tighter on spaces. We need to know who really committed to living with us so that if we're turning someone away, we're doing that with the best information that we have. What we don't want to do is tell someone we can't house them, they make alternative arrangements, and then spaces open up after the fact. We really try to be as close as we can with that information. So deadlines are very important. Students are not always mindful of deadlines. I know there's been some reminders that have gone out, and there's going to be some more reminders that continue to go out. But if they're really interested in on-campus housing, I would encourage them to make sure they apply by that November 26th deadline. And now I'll yield over to Aaron, and he'll talk about the off-campus market.
Great. And I'll just remind folks, some questions are coming in the Q&A. Please continue to drop those in there, and we'll answer those at the end of my slides. So again, my name is Aaron Bockenheimer. I serve as the Executive Director for Student Development and Campus Partnerships, and I oversee our off-campus student life program. Let's talk a little bit about why undergraduate students choose to move off campus. We have approximately 8,500 undergraduates who live off campus. As Stephen mentioned, a little less than half of the sophomore class ends up moving off campus, and then we see a pretty significant jump the junior year, right? So the majority of our students live on for the first 2 years, and we strongly encourage that, depending on individual circumstances. And then we tend to see most, but not all, juniors and seniors moving off campus. We talk to students about why they move off campus, and these are probably not surprising to you in terms of the answers that they give us. Some of it is, I joined a fraternity and sorority, and so I'm moving off campus to live in the fraternity or sorority house. Some are looking for more space. Some are looking for privacy. Some want to cook for themselves, although that's an interesting conversation sometimes. We often hear students talking about wanting to cook for themselves, and then about 4 or 5 weeks into this semester of living off campus, they often say, "I'm spending a lot of money eating out because cooking for myself it was not as exciting as I thought it was going to be." So I just offer that as a somewhat humorous anecdote. But part of our conversation with students, if they say, I really want to cook for myself, we sometimes dive a little deeper into that conversation if that's a main driver for them. As we mentioned, cost can be a factor depending on where they live, but not always, right? And so we want to make sure that students understand the costs associated with that, but that is a driver for some. Amenities of living off campus, the parking options, again, an area that we spend a lot of time talking with students about because students often assume that a bed off campus equates to a parking spot off campus. And we actually are seeing that less and less often, particularly with newer developments where they may have one parking space per unit, but not necessarily one parking space per pillow. So we talk a lot with students, but these are the reasons why students talk about, sometimes it's just that like they have an internship or a job that they want to be able to have closer access to and get to. And then for some, it's just a natural course of maturity and development, and they're ready for that next step in life. And we understand and certainly support that. And my office helps students think through these considerations and give them information so they can make more informed choices. So let's talk a second about the off-campus housing market. We've already alluded to some of this, but generally speaking, so there's a lot of housing off campus, apartment complexes, single-family rental houses, duplexes, Chapel Hill and Carborough, and the communities that surround us. But really, for many students in their mind, they tend to hone in, at least initially, on a handful of highly desired, what we call by design student rental properties that have 100% or nearly 100% of Carolina undergraduates living in them, and that are, in most cases, walkable to campus. That's a pretty small number of properties off campus. And so when you hear about sort of the rush to lease signing or some of the pressure that exists, it's really for a pretty small number of properties that are 100% undergraduate Carolina students in very close proximity to downtown and campus. And then there's this whole other market that exists out there. And so, we often talk to students about that. We will help you find a place to live. But if you're feeling like you want to live in one of those 5 properties, then yes, there may be an accelerated timeline and sense of pressure because there's a lot of interest in those properties, understandably, right? Those are newer properties. Most of them have been built within the last decade or so, with a lot of very popular by design student rental amenities, right? Things that they know traditionally aged undergraduate students want in their off-campus living. And what we often hear is that while there is certainly the properties are offering the opportunity to lease in that September, October, November timeframe, it's often student peer-to-peer pressure to sign early, right? Like, hey, I want to live in this place. You should live with me, and we need to sign now, because if we don't sign now, we're going to end up on a wait list, right? And so we hear that a lot, and we talk to students often about, again, if you have all the information you need to make an informed decision, and you've really been thoughtful and considerate about getting the information you need, then by all means, if that's the place you want to live, then go ahead. Because if you wait, you will have a harder time getting into that place. But it's really important that you're not making that decision rashly or without the information you need to be informed. Right. So this is it's really important. And as I said, these properties are run by large national management companies operating in a really sort of hyper competitive local market in many places around the country. And so the issues that they are hearing about in Chapel Hill, they are also dealing with in Boulder, Colorado, and in College Station, Texas, and other like communities around the country. So we put out a message every year on early lease signing, because this is something we hear a lot from families about, that this pressure. to sign leases early. And Stephen talked about the moving of the on-campus housing process to sort of align with the off-campus market. We know that this is an issue, right? And we know that this is a stressor for some. We believe that students benefit from living on campus for 2 years. And so and as Stephen said, there's a lot of benefits to living on campus for at least your first 2 years. And there's a lot of concerns that we have about students signing leases with folks that they barely know, right? Or making decisions with not enough information. And so our advice to students and to family members is we want you to take a proactive approach, right? We want you to gather information. We are here to help you gather information. We encourage families and parents to be part of the conversation, to engage your students early, to encourage them to seek out information, whether it's through our office or Carolina Housing or Carolina Student Legal Services. Set some expectations, make sure students know and understand particularly things like budget and resources, and help them, right, through their decision-making process. And if there are students on this call, we would say the same thing, right, that we would encourage you to engage your family members and others that you can rely on to help give you good guidance, and reach out to us so that we can help you navigate what we know can sometimes be a stressful process. A couple of things we hope folks will consider before they sign a lease at whatever point in time that is, right? So first of all, is this the right time to move off campus? You know, what is your particular situation? Is this the right time? And we spend a lot of time talking to students about just that initial decision. We'll get to where, if you choose to live off campus, we can get to where you might want to live in a minute. Well, let's first talk about, is this the right time to move off campus? As Stephen said, you know, we have seniors who will often, you know, say, well, you know, I'm graduating in May and I have a job waiting for me in Chicago, uh, you know, May 15th. Do I really want to have a lease that doesn't run out until August 15th? You know, maybe I want to live on campus another year or my last year, because then I don't have to worry about subleasing. And so just thinking through, is this the right time? What's my budget? Right? What are my resources, and what are all of the costs associated? What do you want? Right? What are your wants? And most importantly, first, what are your needs? What are the things that you need to have in your living environment so that you can be successful? How well do you know potential roommates and housemates? And have you talked about shared expectations? Right? It's challenging when you're 6 weeks into living with somebody and the dishes are piling up in the sink and both parties are pointing at each other like, I thought you were going to wash the dishes. I thought you were going to wash the dishes. So we want students to have those conversations in advance. As we discussed, do you have study abroad or summer plans? We have many students who are like, oh, I'll sublease. I'm good to go. I'm sublease. I can tell you from a lot of experience that we have more students who are offering space to sublease than we have students looking to get into a sublease situation. And so it can be a challenging market. And so we always give students a heads up that, like, you can certainly try to sublease your place, but it may be a challenge. And then we are big fans of Carolina Student Legal Services here on campus. That is a free a set of attorneys right here in the Carolina Union that students can access for no additional cost to go talk to and have them review their lease and talk to any number of off-campus living situations. If you are having landlord issues, if you didn't get your security deposit back, and you have concerns about that, Carolina Student Legal Services is a great resource. And so at this time, we want to open it up for some Q&A, and we'd love to hear from you all. There are already, I think, some questions out there, and I'm happy to sort of go through these, and I'll sort of triage these as we go along. By the way, I have another slide with all of our contact information, and then Stephen and I will make sure we drop our email addresses in the chat as well. So we do have contact information, and I'll share that. And we'll also share some website information if you want to have some resources of other places to go. So we've got a question. Do you have any information on Shortbread Lofts as far as where that falls on the cost slide? So Shortbread, Carolina Square, Warehouse, Lark, that is one of those near campus sort of handful of properties that's relatively new still, that's 100% undergraduate students. And most of those properties fall into that sort of mid to higher end price point because of their amenities, their proximity to downtown and campus. So Shortbread is going to be on the mid to high end of that scale. Again, depending on how many people you are living with. So when I say that, I'm talking about sort of a one bedroom sort of cost, right? I know of occasions when students are putting 8 people in a 4-bedroom Shortbread unit. In terms of housing, by the way, I will mention that if your student indicates, hey, we're moving into this house off campus in Chapel Hill, and there's going to be 8 of us living there, the town of Chapel Hill has a no more than 4 unrelated persons occupancy ordinance. And so many times in those over-occupied situations, we have students who are not signing a lease, which is very concerning for us, and it should be concerning for you. A lease gives the landlord protections, but it also gives the person leasing and renting protections. And if you are not signing a lease or you are not on the lease, that can be problematic. And there are certainly examples of students having to be evicted if the town discovers that there are more than 4 unrelated people together. So I just wanted to mention that. Question, what do you suggest for lodging for students that say for summer school or summer projects on campus? Stephen, you want to take that one?
Yes, so there's a little bit of a caveat to that one. So on-campus housing is available for enrolled students. So we do have some who might be doing an assistantship or doing an internship over the summer, or oftentimes students are employed in research labs and doing some research opportunities. For those, unless they're enrolled in a class, they can't live on campus. But if they are enrolled in classes for the term that they're enrolled, they can live on campus. We do offer summer housing. It is a little more limited as we typically only have about 350 students per summer session living on campus. So we don't have all of our buildings open for the summer. We tend to kind of consolidate them into some North Campus locations. Other than that, they may look for, as Aaron pointed out, a sublease opportunity off campus. Using the off-campus housing website is usually a really good resource to start that process as well.
Yeah, I'll often, certainly encourage folks to use our off-campus website, offcampushousing.unc.edu. Students can post listings for free on that site. And so there's often sublease opportunities for summer sessions and or fall and spring if students are going abroad. And then there's also actually a student-run website called Roomadillo, and there's a Facebook page that is pretty popular with students who are posting subleases for summertime. So, encourage folks to check out all of those options.
Saw their signs on campus yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they're not supposed to be posting them on campus. I may have to check and have a conversation with my friends over at Roomadillo. So half kidding, but I like pubbing them because that's a student-run service, and they do cool stuff. Stephen says, is the preference for residence halls for second years fully random? What factors go into getting a student's first choice selection?
Yeah, so I didn't touch on that earlier. I do want to kind of clarify for our second year students in particular, it's a big switch from year 1 to year 2. So returning students, we define them as anyone that's above a first year, so rising sophomore, junior, senior. If you've ever booked a flight where you've picked your seat on the plane, that's how room selection works for our returning students. After the priority deadline on November 27th, we'll email everyone who applied what their room selection time slot is. And that's the time where they log into the system and they'll see what's available. They can filter out results. So they can say, I want to look for apartment style housing. And if there's any available, it'll show them what results are available. And they'll actually go in and select their room. And if they're in a roommate group, they'll select the rooms for their roommates and they make their assignment that way. So the majority of our returning students will go through and self-select their room for the upcoming academic year. We are waiting to see what our application numbers are to see exactly how the days are going to fall out for there, because the way we do it is we'll spread it out. So roughly 20 get to go in every 20 minutes so that we're not bogging the system down. We spread that out over several days. But if they're in a roommate group, everyone in the roommate group has an opportunity to use their room selection time slot. So typically they'll find the person with the best slot and have that person pick for the entire group. So to answer the question more specifically, listing your preferences as a returning student is more for if you end up on a wait list for housing, you skip room selection, or just for us to use for data purposes to see what our demand trends are to see where students are going. Because almost all of our students will go through self-selection and select their own room.
Sort of a related question. It says for aspiring juniors for 24-25 housing, can students apply only for the suite style setup and not be obligated for a suite setup or something? I'm assuming they mean for something other than suite setup if that's not available or oversubscribed. And is that a reason why students sometimes apply off campus because they're not sure they're going to get what they want?
So when you're applying for on-campus housing, that's for any space available on campus. There's an idea that if I don't get the space that I wanted, I get to cancel my contract without a penalty, and that's not the case. Once the contract is submitted, that cancellation penalty will be there if you don't get your preference. It's not tied to a specific building or room type or anything like that. It's just the availability of on-campus housing. So we want to be very clear that you can list your preferences, but if you don't receive your preference, that is not a free cancellation. I know last year we did release some students from their contract because we had a high demand for space. That may be a possibility at some point in time, but please don't bank on that as a means to get out of a housing contract. It is a contract because we don't charge an application fee or a deposit. There is an exit fee if you choose to cancel to move off campus. And I every year we have roughly 600 or 700 students who will go that route, sign up for on-campus housing, and then make alternative arrangements and move off campus. And we're supportive of that. But because of that number, there's a penalty associated with that. So we're not turning students away.
So this is another on-campus assignments question, but maybe it's like more tied to the roommate piece. So it says, I believe that students like second year and beyond who are awarded on-campus housing are then given a daytime when they choose a specific room, and you talked about that. And then it says, when are random roommates assignments done, or do you get the roommate assigned first and then choose the room? My student is looking for a new roommate next year, but wasn't sure how that worked after the first year in terms of finding a compatible roommate.
Yeah, so when we go into room selection at that time, everything's going to fill up. So the random roommate piece, if they select a room, either they'll select a room with a random roommate that's already in that space, or if they select one without a roommate, somebody will come and fill that space up. So there are opportunities for room changes and room swaps if they identify a different roommate. Maybe they have a fallen out because it's pretty early. You know, we're still kind of at the tail end of the honeymoon phase for some of our roommate pairs now. But there's an opportunity for room changes and things like that. But they want to, when they're going into room selection, they want to have that as locked down as they can, because it's not always a guarantee that we can change their rooms if they're trying to match up. For example, if they create a roommate group of friends that they say, hey, we want an 8-person suite after room selection, it's going to be very hard for us to find a vacant 8-person suite to move that group to. So.
If my student, and this is a transfer student currently living off campus, applies for on-campus housing such that she is a returning student, does she have assurance that she will get on-campus housing next year? So this is a student, sounds like, who transferred in, did not get on-campus housing, ended up living off campus this year, but would like to come on campus.
So that's a little tricky. So in years past, every returning student who's applied by the party deadline received on-campus housing, and we typically took care of everyone who applied thereafter. Unfortunately, your daughter was one of the students this past year where we were not able to house everyone due to our increased demand. The only students that we ever truly guarantee an on-campus space for, though, are our incoming first-year students due to the live-on requirement that we have. So to answer your question, your daughter is not guaranteed housing. It is our goal to provide everyone with housing that applies by the priority date. Some of that, part of the answer to that question, though, will depend on how many more returning students apply because the application process is still ongoing. So we will monitor that. We'll use our projections to see who we can and cannot house. There will be a wait list at the end of room selection from students who applied by the priority deadline. And that's because we're working through special program spaces like RLPs and things like that as they finalize rosters. But we'll have more information around kind of where we anticipate our housing numbers to go after the housing party deadline on November 26th. So they're not guaranteed. It is our goal to house everyone who applies, but until we know how many students are applying, it's hard to answer that one.
And Stephen, I think you mentioned this earlier, but just to revisit it more specifically, are returning student room selection time slots based on the order in which the applications were received, or it's more like a pure, like once you've met the deadline, you're
So
in? How does that work?
so the time slots for housing selection, we do them by academic class, not by when the application is submitted. So we take, if for example, I have 500 seniors who apply for on-campus housing, we randomize the order that those 500 seniors will select their room. And typically we do seniors, then juniors, then sophomores. And it's done by academic standing. So if a student is an incoming or current first year, but they came in with 60 credits that transferred to Carolina, they'll actually, their academic standing will carry them to a higher priority room selection time slot, if you will. So it's done randomly within the academic class that they are defined by the registrar's office. So if they're currently listed as a first year, they'll be a rising sophomore. If they're currently listed as a sophomore, they'll be a rising junior, and so on.
All right, here's one for me. Is our office available to assist students who want to go off campus for housing to a non-UNC property? Will you assist in working with or suggesting reputable management companies, filling out applications, et cetera, for non-UNC housing? So our office, off-campus student life, is definitely here to help. Let me sort of briefly explain sort of what we do and what we don't do. We are here to provide guidance, resources, support, information for students. We don't do the process for them, but many times over the years, we will meet with students and probably more common for transfer students or students, graduate students who are unfamiliar with the housing market, but even current undergraduate students. We'll sit down with them. If they come to us and say, I'm just really struggling to figure out off-campus housing, we'll sit down and say, what are the things you need in terms of off-campus housing, including what's your budget? What are the things that you'd like to have in off-campus housing? And we'll talk about things like transportation, and do you want housemates and roommates, and do you need a place to park your car, and all that kind of stuff. And then we're happy to sort of walk them through some listing services, including our off-campus housing website. We're happy to send them some examples, right? 5 to 7, sort of like, hey, have you looked at these properties? Do these properties start to meet kind of what you're looking for? Ultimately, we expect students to kind of do the work, right? So they'll need to contact the property management companies. They will need to fill out the application, but we're here to help them along the way. And I mentioned earlier, Carolina Student Legal Services is also a great resource for some of that more technical review of lease terms and the lease itself. And so, yes, we are definitely here to help. We really want the student or students, if there's a group of students, right, to be the drivers. We try to put the responsibility in their hands to follow up, to get to make contact, to do the communicating. Like we don't reach out to properties on students' behalf, but we will definitely walk with them through the process and help them get started and make sure that they have access to all the information they need to make those informed choices, and to make sure they have somebody to help answer questions if they have questions along the way. And before I go on to the next question, I will say it's awesome to hear a comment too that my sophomore son has been having a great time living on campus this last year and a half. So we're always excited to hear that. Can a student apply without a roommate, but later change if they find someone to room with? So by the time the room selection day comes, they can pick it with their roommate.
So yes, once the application is submitted, students can make updates to the roommate group. If they identify a roommate after the fact or want to change their roommate group around, they're more than welcome to do so. The challenging part is if they have selected a room, they can't change their room during room selection, or if they identify a roommate after room selection, We have a different process to handle room changes and room swaps and things like that. And we do quite a few of those every year, several hundred. It just becomes a little bit harder. For example, when all the spaces fill up on campus and a student says, "Hey, I now want to live with someone else, but I want to live somewhere else." We have to find availability in that space that they want to go to. And oftentimes, if it's a roommate pair, they're now asking for a vacant double room, not just one space in a new building. They're asking for two spaces that are also together. So we will work through room changes. We'll provide information around the reassignment process, and we also have that on our website as well.
Is there a website or a place that returning students can go to find a roommate? So I can answer that for off campus, but Stephen, do you, do we do anything on campus to help students find a roommate if they're a returning student?
Yes, every incoming class has a either WhatsApp or GroupMe group where they can connect with one another and their peers to try and connect with one another. In the housing application for on-campus housing, there's also a roommate search tool that's part of that process. So we typically see about 4,500 returning students a year. So there's a pool of roughly 4,500 students that they'll match up with, they can then connect with, and then oftentimes they'll share social media and phone numbers and things like that, and then they'll connect outside of that to see if they're a good match. And now's a good opportunity to do that, as they can still meet for lunch and things like that here on campus before the application deadline closes, or with the recent most folks traveling for the holidays, they could make a phone call, as crazy as that sounds, on a text message, and reach out and see if they can connect there as well.
Yep. And on the off-campus housing.unc.edu website, we also have a roommate section, and so it's locked down to just UNC folks. And so you go in with your UNC Onion and password. You can see other Carolina affiliated folks who are looking for housemates and roommates. You can create a roommate profile and communicate with that person. And some people already have a place to live and are looking for a roommate. Some people are just looking to connect with somebody first and then hope to go find a place to live once they found a housemate or roommate. So we find that that's a great place for students to go look for housemates and roommates on the off-campus housing.unc.edu website. And I think Stephen is typing some answers to a couple of these questions because they're pretty quick, I think, responses. Let me just sort of see here. Room selection starts right after the priority selection period ends, correct, Stephen? So basically that ends on the 26th and then room selection starts right after that, correct?
Time slot emails will go out November 27th by the end of business, and we will start room selection midday on November 28th. Keep in mind, our office is closed on the Thanksgiving holiday, so Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So we'll answer questions when we return to the office. So if they have any questions this weekend and early next week is when they want to get them in. But once the priority deadline passes, we'll gather all the information, send out the room selection time slots on the 27th.
Cool. And are sophomores allowed to room with a first-year friend coming in, or do all classes have to room with someone of the same class?
So the answer is no, they are not allowed. We restrict first-year students to our first-year halls. The only exceptions we make to that is siblings if they wanted to live with one another, but that would require the upper division student, so either sophomore, junior, senior, to move into a first-year building. And surprisingly, the last 10 years, I think we've only had one take us up on that one. So it's really
But beyond the first year, you can live with whomever.
correct.
So we have sophomores living with juniors and juniors living with seniors, cats and dogs.
Mhm.
Cool. Not really. Sorry, just a little joke. Uh, are freshmen currently abroad studying allowed to submit housing application by the upcoming deadline?
Yes, and we have sent, I believe you're referring to the Global Launch Scholars that are currently abroad and coming back here in this, or coming for the first time in the spring. Yes, they are considered returning students. We don't want them to miss out on that opportunity to go through the returner process. And we have sent communication to them about all of our deadlines, and we've included them on all the communication that we've sent to our current residents here on campus.
Awesome. Wow, y'all, those were some great questions. That's terrific. Thank you so much for submitting those. I hope this conversation has been helpful to you. We've got a few minutes left, and so folks can continue to drop questions. I know that Justin with New Student Family Programs put our contact information in the chat, but I will share this slide with both Stephen and my email address and our phone number. I've also included some of our website information and our social media accounts, and so welcome folks to get in touch with us through those venues. This does not have to be the end or just a one-time conversation. So please, we are happy to continue these conversations. Reach out to us or have your student reach out to us if you are a parent family member. We will continue these discussions and happy to chat. Obviously, want to keep the housing timeline and deadlines in mind, but I will share with folks. Again, I've been at Carolina now for 14 years, working with students here, 23 years working on other campuses. I connect with undergraduate students in April, May, June, July, even early August sometimes, who are still looking for housing, and I have yet to not have a student find housing somewhere, right? It may not always be, as I indicated earlier, in one of those 5 properties that's 100% Carolina students in walking distance to campus, but we are always here to help, and we hope students will continue to reach out to us, and that you will continue to reach out to us. I see. Not sure if this is a question or incomplete question. Can you speak? Oh, I got it now. Can you speak about housing? Right. Can you speak to housing at Granville? Stephen, do you want to offer anything about Granville Towers?
I can. So Granville's a little bit of a unique, it's kind of a mixture if you think of off-campus housing and on. For some context, the property is owned by the university's foundation, which is a fundraising arm here at UNC, but it is operated by a private entity. So the contracting and leasing and management of that property is done through American Campus Communities. But they do contract with us to support the Res Life program. So if you think about the RAs, the community directors, all of those services are present in Granville. And we do work very closely with them with all kinds of different areas of campus, because it is a campus property. It's just operated a little bit differently. That is a property that's roughly 1,200 beds. Generally, about 1,000 of those are incoming first-year students. So it's very heavily first year, but there are returning students. It's a great option. There are some nuances around their housing contract and meal plan and things like that. The big thing is the contracts are not transferable between on-campus housing and Granville. So if your student is considering them, I would encourage you to go to their website or give their office a call so they can answer any specific questions about the property. Those are mostly what you would call kind of a Jack and Jill style double occupancy room shared with an adjoining double occupancy room that's connected by a bathroom.
I've got sort of 2 questions from the same person, and I think it's maybe just the same question said a different way, but can you please restate what the application selection, I'm assuming that selection offers, and then when students make their housing preferences on the application, what does this offer?
Yeah, so as a returning student, most of them will go through room selection where they select their own room, like booking a flight. But we still ask for preferences. And the reason we do that is we want that data for trying to see where demand is. Are we seeing more suite style demand? We know anecdotally those are oftentimes, but it's nice to have that data as we're thinking around planning long term. But we also will have students who, for whatever reason, choose to not go through room selection. They don't choose a room, so we have to assign them, and we want that information. Or if they're placed on a wait list, we will manually assign those students, and we will use that preference information there.
I've got a question. What if the student only needs housing for the upcoming spring semester for their last semester at Carolina? Are there options for students to get housing for this upcoming spring semester, Stephen?
There are. That application is live as well. We actually are going to send those assignments out early next week. So if they're looking for on-campus housing for just the spring, I would encourage them to go ahead and complete that application. I always like to preface that Housing in the spring is limited to oftentimes spaces that students have graduated or gone to study abroad from. So preferences are harder to match up there. And oftentimes there's a high demand for singles from upper division students, but I can tell you with a high degree of certainty, it's unlikely they'll be able to get a private room just because of the demand.
Yep. And before I'm happy to stay and answer additional questions, but before we do that, I want to make note that this is being recorded. And I think Justin from New Student Family Programs will hop on in a minute and share folks like how that will be available and where it will be available and when it will be available. So if you have folks or know folks who wanted to be here today but couldn't be here, this presentation is being recorded and will be available after the fact. I just want to mention about the spring semester. That's also where off-campus subletting comes into play. And so encourage folks to, again, check out offcampushousing.unc.edu or Roomadillo or the Facebook group. There's often quite a bit of sublease options for the spring semester. So again, the student may be going abroad or graduating early and have those spaces available. And so encourage you to check that out. I'm happy to toggle to the slide deck of the on-campus housing types in just a second. There is a question about, do you have to apply specifically for a single or can you get it on room selection day if there's one available? But Stephen, maybe you're typing in the answer.
Yes, you can grab a single if they're available. If you're a rising sophomore, it's unlikely you're going to get a single room. We have very few on our campus. We are more predominantly heavy double, so those tend to fill up with students with medical accommodations. Also, students that are currently on campus in those spaces, if they're returning to Carolina, have an option to renew those rooms. So once you get into one, you can keep it for a while, but they tend to fill up pretty quickly.
And I hope this is what the person was looking for. These are the different housing option types in terms of on campus. Justin, would you like to say a couple words on behalf of the office?
And just on that last note, I'll share, there is a website on Carolina Housing's website that specifically covers room types. So you can dig a bit deeper into what's on that slide there on that site. I want to say thank you all for being here. I know we're at 2:01, so we're starting to see attendees drop off for their next thing. Thank you for being here. At New Student Family Programs, we're in the business of helping new first-year and transfer students transition well to this place. Additionally, we want to make sure we're partnering and supporting the biggest supporters of our students, parents, family members, and their other support networks. So thank you for being here to get good information. We will continue to look at what we can offer families and parents in the future. So please stay tuned to your email inboxes. And for this specific piece, first, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing the good information ahead of the deadline. And secondly, there are a lot of folks who couldn't make it today, right? So we will make this available. We'll send it via email to everyone who got the invitation to be here. We'll post it in the UNC Family Experience news portal. We'll also share it via our social media channels. And lastly, we'll make sure it's available on our website, nsfp.unc.edu, which I will make sure I drop here for you to click on and have that bookmarked for all of your current and upcoming needs. If we can help you, please call us, email us, reach out to us. We're happy to give support. Thank you.
Thanks,
With
Justin.
that said, it's 2:02. Aaron, Stephen, we can conclude. I did hear, I think, Aaron, you say that you maybe had if you needed to share a couple more things, you could, but I know y'all have other things happening today as well.
Yeah, it looks like we don't have any more questions in there, and so fine to wrap it up. But again, just hope folks will access our contact information if they need to continue the conversation. We're here, and we appreciate everybody joining the call today. And go Heels!
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Aaron. Have a great day. And
Thank
happy
you. You too.
Turkey Day.
You too. Take care.
You too.